All right. Well, last night we unpacked the dark enchantments of modernity from the silver chair. And so to recap that, for those of you who weren't here, or for those of you who are sitting in the front section here and had to run away, the basic claim I made was that in this encounter with the witch, she made an argument. It's all projection. Aslan is just a bigger and better cat. The sun is just a bigger and better lamp. But all of these invisible things are just projections. God is just a projection of your earthly father as a wish fulfillment because you can't cope with reality. And that argument was supported by a mocking and patronizing tone. Aren't you so ashamed of your silly little fairy tales? As well as the repetition of the naturalistic catechism. There is no sun, there never was a sun, there isn't any sun, which I then connected to the myth of universal evolutionism. That's the real world counterpart to that, which we're catechized in constantly. And that argument and that tone and that repetition were enhanced by this background noise, the incense and the thrumming, that I identified with the worldview shaping power of our modern technological environment. Okay, the modern, and let me just underscore that. I think I went quickly through it, so let me just underscore what I meant by that. The idea there was that the driving force in the modern world is the quest for or lust for control. We want to control things. And the success of our scientific and technological efforts trains us to think about the world in a certain way, because it trains us to think that the only real things are controllable things. So if you can't control it, it doesn't exist. And you can't control angels, and you can't control demons, and you can't control God. And so angels, demons, and gods, and fairies, and ghosts, and everything else, none of that is real. And so when we live in an environment that's saturated with our devices, our phones, our computers, our microwaves, and when we live in homes that maintain the temperature at a constant level, no matter what the weather is like outside, and even when we venture outside and the world we encounter is not sort of nature in the raw, but nature cultivated and conformed to human desires, then that habit of looking at the world as malleable and controllable gets into your brain, gets into your blood, and makes it hard to think, so that when someone comes along and says, the only real things are physical things, including you. You're just matter in motion. We can reduce you down to chemicals. There's a way that we've been habituated to think of things that way, and so it kind of makes sense. Even if we ultimately reject it, we still feel a little bit of that pull. So I wanted to underscore two other elements, though. One was, I mentioned this at the end, but we shouldn't ignore the fact that in addition to those elements I just described, there's also a dark power that is wielding those elements against us. Okay, so in the story, that's represented by the witch, who is a dragon, who is a serpent, who eventually will get her head cut off. But she's wielding that argument and that rhetoric and those myths and that mood to lull us to sleep and put us under a spell. So there are dark forces at work in this. And then I mentioned these sort of three responses that we can have to that reality. The relief of giving in, like the children kind of feels so good to just give in. The existential horror that some people feel when they begin to feel like the world is meaningless and absurd. And then that kind of self-flattery of, I'm man enough to take it. I can stare nature and reality in the face and not flinch. Those were the three I highlighted. But a friend actually mentioned a fourth that I think is actually really insightful. He mentioned after my talk, he said, there's actually this kind of detached agnosticism where, well, I don't really know what's what, and so I'm just going to distract myself from answering any of these questions by doom scrolling on X or endless YouTube videos or being addicted to Instagram and TikTok. I'm just going to numb any of the existential questions or doubts I might have with my media. And I thought, yeah, that's a lot of people right there. So that's where we were. That's the enchantment. Now I want to explore in this talk how Puddleglum breaks the spell. So here we go. Witches just put them to sleep or told them to go to bed. And the prince and the two children were standing with their heads hung down, their cheeks flushed and their eyes half closed, the strength all gone from them, the enchantment almost complete. But Puddleglum, desperately gathering all his strength, walked over to the fire, and then he did a very brave thing. He knew it wouldn't hurt him quite as much as it would hurt a human, for his feet, which were bare, were webbed and hard and cold-blooded like a duck's. But he knew it would hurt him badly enough, and so it did. With his bare foot, he stamped on the fire, grinding a large part of it into ashes on the flat hearth. And three things happened at once. First, the sweet, heavy smell grew very much less. For though the whole fire had not been put out, a good bit of it had, and what remained smelled very largely of burnt marshwiggle, which is not at all an enchanting smell. This instantly made everyone's brain far clearer. The prince and the children held up their heads again and opened their eyes. Secondly, the witch, in a loud, terrible voice, utterly different from all the sweet tones she had been using up till now, called out, "What are you doing? Dare to touch my fire again, mud filth, and I'll turn the blood to fire inside your veins." And thirdly, the pain itself made Puddleglum's head for a moment perfectly clear, and he knew exactly what he really thought. There's nothing like a good shock of pain for dissolving certain kinds of magic. "One word, ma'am," he said, coming back from the fire, limping because of the pain. "One word. All you've been saying is quite right, I shouldn't wonder. I'm a chap who always likes to know the worst and then put the best face I can on it. So I won't deny any of what you said. But there's one thing more to be said even so. Suppose we have only dreamed or made up all those things, trees and grass and sun and moon and stars and Aslan himself. Suppose we have. Then all I can say is that in that case, the made-up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this black pit of a kingdom of yours is the only world. Well, it strikes me as a pretty poor one. And that's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just babies making up a game, if you're right. But four babies playing a game can make a play world which licks your real world hollow. And that's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia. So thanking you kindly for our supper, if these two gentlemen and the young lady are ready, we're leaving your court at once and setting out in the dark to spend our lives looking for overland. Not that our lives will be very long, I should think, but that's small loss if the world's as dull a place as you say." Now that immediately rouses the spirits of the others. The witch transforms into a green serpent, and after a brief battle, she's killed, and the story continues on. Now, before considering Puddleglum's words, I just want you to note his actions came first. He did a very brave thing. So there are times in our lives when thought precedes action. Thought comes first. But sometimes it's important that certain actions come before thinking. Ransom discovers this on Paralandra. Don't argue with the devil, kill him. Don't reason with the witch, put your foot in the fire. Now, the three immediate effects of Puddleglum's bravery, the drowsy, enchanting smell being replaced by burnt marshwiggle, the witch dropping the mask of sweetness and niceness and becoming the witch that she truly is, and Puddleglum's head being cleared completely. What are these meant to tell us? Well, Lewis really believed that pain, suffering, and hardship, as well as pleasure, had a vital role in clearing the mind and enabling a person to see what really matters. So in Screwtape, he wrote, this is Screwtape saying, "The characteristic of pains and pleasures is that they are unmistakably real. And therefore, as far as they go, give the man who feels them a touchstone of reality." It's an important phrase. Pain and pleasure give us touchstones of reality. They cut through the fog. So in Paralandra, Ransom discovers this in relation to pleasure. He's encountering various kinds of pleasure on Venus, mainly pleasures of eating and drinking. Every time he eats something, it's like the greatest thing he's ever had. And at one point, he comes across these bubble trees, these trees that like these little bubbles kind of blow up and then they pop. And so he's trying to figure it out, and he reaches out and he touches one, and his head, face, and shoulders are drenched with an ice-cold shower bath, and his nostrils were filled with a sharp, shrill, exquisite scent. And the refreshment was so potent that he felt like up until that point, he'd been asleep. I'd been half awake. And when he opened his eyes, All the colors about him seemed richer, and the dimness of the world seemed clarified. And listen, a re-enchantment fell upon him. Now, this is interesting, right? Enchantment. But this re-enchantment is actually waking him up to reality, not putting him to sleep from reality. Okay? So the pleasure awakened him to the way the world really is. It didn't numb and dull him to the way the world really is. But more importantly than that, pleasure, and then Lewis wants to say, especially pain, enables us to hear from the one who speaks through them. So Lewis writes, we can ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. That's what's going on with Puddleglum. He puts his foot in the fire, feels the pain, and it wakes him up. It rouses him because he had been going deaf. And so if the modern world, which lusts for total control, well, pain and pleasure are not controllable. They impose upon us. They break through the worldly crusts and the materialist moods that descend. We're forced to deal with reality beyond our manipulations. Now, in saying that, we're not masochists. I'm not saying, right, go around and like beat yourself up or something. Nor are we hedonists in the sensual sense. But Lewis is speaking here to the need to address the environment. So I want to say something about this. So if our modern technological culture has gotten so into our blood that we experience the world as absent of spiritual reality, like we just don't even see it, then we need to develop new habits that reinforce that reality transcends human control and that there are other agents in the universe, particularly one agent with a capital A. In other words, we need to touch grass. We need to encounter resistant reality. So when I think about this, I think about something as simple as planting a garden. We garden, we have a little garden at our house. Caring for your lawn, we started doing that. We started like, hey, let's care for this lawn, let's water this baby. Try to see if we can grow some grass. It's not easy in Idaho. It's much easier in Minnesota. But the idea is that in doing these things, we are reinforcing for ourselves that reality has an integrity of its own given by God. Like it does things and you have to work with it. We're stewards of the world and we're dependent upon God for fruitfulness. So yes, we put the seeds in the ground, and yes, we rake and we water and we weed and we feed, but God gives the growth. And doing that sort of activity reinforces God has to give the growth. There's somebody else on the other end of this thing. It's not automatic. You can think about the Canon Plus documentary on Joel Salatin, lunatic farmer. Some of you maybe have seen that. And in that, he distinguishes between modern commercial agriculture that relies mainly on chemistry and technology from his kind of stewardship agriculture that wants to cultivate and conform to the remarkable, intricate system that God has built. Like, how do we cut with the grain? And that first kind easily becomes this lust for domination, whereas the latter is aimed at fruitful dominion. Dominion and domination are not the same. What's the difference? Okay, what distinguishes them is respect for God's design. Like somebody else built this to do something. I need to figure out how and why he built it and cut with the grain of reality. So often our modern technology is designed, this is how we talk, right? To hack reality. We want to hack it, which means breaking it, taking it and dismantling it, and then reassembling it according to our own desires. But fruitful dominion stewards reality. Cuts with the grain. It recognizes God's wisdom. It seeks to work to draw out the hidden potentials that are there and overcome the curse that rests upon the world as a result of the fall. But that second way, fruitful dominion, requires patience, which our modern world is at war with. In a world of DoorDash and on-demand streaming and AI search functions that can immediately answer every question you could possibly have, learning to sow and to water and to wait, or to raise chickens from hatchlings to maturity, that's a fruitful resistance to the spirit of the age. I've got a 6-year-old. One of the books that we've read is Mortimer's First Garden. It's about this little mouse who loves seeds, and he overhears the people talking about the fact that you can plant seeds and they'll give you you plant the seed and it'll give you a lot more seeds. And he's like, there's no way that's real. And so he's like, but I'll try it. And so he plants a seed, and then the whole thing is basically about him just impatiently, like, where's the seeds? Where's the flower? I want more. But he sticks with it, and he waters, and he just imitates what the people are doing. And eventually the big flower grows, and all of a sudden the seeds, and he's like, it's a miracle. This is amazing. It's a great little book. I've used that book with my 6-year-old over and over again. When he's being impatient, I'm like, hey, are you going to be like Mortimer? Right? Story always wins. Right? And it actually helps. If I just said, be patient, I still get the fussies. But if I say, Mortimer had to wait, and you've had to wait for the tomatoes to bloom in the garden, and for the eggs to come out. He's like, when we have chickens, we got chickens. And when the chickens we've collected the eggs for that day, and he's like, I want to go check the chickens again. I'm like, buddy, there are no more eggs. We got them all. There'll be more tomorrow, but you have to be patient. And the benefits of this are actually kind of surprising. I was talking to a rural pastor one time, and he told me that he thought that the resistance to the sexual revolution in his community, red state America, was in part owing to being catechized and shaped by resistant reality through animals and crops. Like when some urban city dweller comes along and says, boys can turn into girls with chemicals and surgery, the farmer who has witnessed the mating habits of sheep goes, I don't think so, Scooter. And this extends, I should say this, to the stewardship of your body. This is just, think about your habits. Because many of our technical solutions are often targeted at problems created by our technologies. Like our technologies break things, and then we try to fix them with our technologies. So we doom scroll at night on your phone till the wee hours, and then the next day, you need 400 milligrams of caffeine and ginseng root to function. This is what Nate was talking about last night. We want the vitamin, and vitamins can be fine. They're supplements. That's what we talk, right? They're supplements. You eat a healthy diet, and then the vitamin supplements. Okay, you live in a northern climate, you don't get enough sun. Have a little of this, get some vitamin C, whatever it is. It's a supplement. We turn supplements into substitutes. We don't need a healthy diet. I don't actually need to sleep. Instead, I'll just take the pill. I'll just down the Red Bull. In other words, we look for shortcuts rather than embracing the way God made us. We look for hacks rather than living as humans. And so this requires us to resist the modern categorical imperative of relentless optimization and instead embrace God's rhythms. And practically speaking, I can think of a couple. One is just the rhythm of waking and sleeping. Like the Bible tells us that he gives his beloved sleep, and a lot of us are like, but does he? Do I really want this gift, Lord? Or I got stuff to do. And so that's the daily rhythm of work and sleep. There's the weekly rhythm of work and rest, the Sabbath. That's an act of resistance to modern technoculture. Right? The rest of the world says we're going to go 24/7. And God says that will kill you. That will be death. Instead, I'm going to give you the Sabbath as life. And I'm going to have you turn off that efficiency, optimization, productivity part of yourself. And instead, I'm going to say, be fruitful. Because the Sabbath is about fruitfulness. And even if you think about the language there of, do you want to be productive or fruitful? You just think about those two different words. We sometimes use them synonymously. But productive is a technology word. The process and efficiency and optimization that produces a product and that you can turn the machine on and it just runs. Fruitfulness involves rhythms. Today we don't work. Today we celebrate. Today we rejoice. Today we worship. Lewis actually talks about this in some of his books about resisting the impatient lust for encore. Talks about the lust for encore, which is this itch to have things over again. And he actually has this fun little line where rants his ransom again. He's eating one of those fruits that was so good, and he was like, I'm going to go get another one and eat it right away. And then he has this little check in his spirit that's like, don't do it. And it says, he had always disliked the people who encored a favorite air in an opera. In other words, play it again, play it again. He says, that just spoils it. And I think in an age of Spotify playlists, like we just have no concept of this. Like the idea that you would ever, like, if you want to hear the song again, play the song again, and again, and again, and again, until you're sick of it. And then you're like, get that away. And then just gorge yourself on something until you're sick of it, and then throw it away. But that idea of like, no, I have it, it was good, and I say then no. Lewis says that itch to have things over again, he said, could be the root of all evil. And then Ransom's like, oh, wait, no, money's the root of all evil. And he's like, oh, but wait, money is the thing that lets us say again and again and again and again. So maybe they're connected. And you could think of other rhythms like this. So you've got the daily and the weekly. You got the annual ones, like special foods. It's just a little subtle thing. Like there's certain foods that you only eat at certain times. I once tried, to my great embarrassment, I asked my wife, could we have pumpkin crunch cake on Easter? And she was like, are you crazy? No, it has a place. It belongs at Thanksgiving. It belongs in the fall. That's when you have the pumpkin things. We're gonna have some carrot cake. We're gonna have some key lime. We're gonna do something else for Easter because there's times and seasons for things and you can be patient. And I would just say that Lewis really developed this out. He thought that the resisting this impatient lust for more is what enabled other kinds of joys. So the pleasure of anticipation and the pleasure of memory are destroyed if you can just go again. And he thinks there really is a special pleasure in anticipation. Any kid on Christmas can tell you part of the joy of Christmas is the run-up to it. The anticipation, watching those presents pile up in front of the tree and going, it's coming, but I have to wait. That's joyful. There's a joy in that in and of itself. And then any person with gray hair can say there's a particular pleasure of memory, of looking back on one's life and recalling all of the joys of the past and having them be brought forward into the present through memory. There's a particular joy there, which is ruined if all you can do is say again and again and again. Okay, so enough about the environment. Let's turn to the rest of Puddleglum's speech. The first thing he does is he answers the witch's argument. And his argument is actually an informal version of the reductio ad absurdum, so reduction to absurdity, which is basically when you grant your opponent's claim and then you try to show that something logically contradictory follows from it. That's the form of argument. Okay, if you're right, let's see the contradiction. Now, the formal fallacy is an actual contradiction. He's just gonna say, your view of the world can't fit something in. There's a funny thing about your view of the world. And so you see that over and over. He says, suppose you're right, suppose you're right, suppose that this world is all that there is. That's weird. What follows? And in doing this, he's saying, I'm actually committed to all of reality, not just your narrow little truncated view of reality, not just reality that's material and measurable and mathematically modelable. She's a partial realist. Lewis once said that through Puddleglum, he wrote this in a letter, that he was putting the ontological proof for God's existence in a children's story. So if you want to go chase that down, Anselm, Descartes, they put this in, and the idea is that like God is the greatest conceivable being. We can conceive of him, and it would be greater for him to exist in reality than just in our imaginations, and therefore he exists. And it's this philosophical argument, and that's what Puddleglum is doing. And he didn't think that this was a demonstrative proof. He didn't think that like this is a slam dunk logical proof. In fact, he once told a guy who was struggling with doubts, he says, I don't think there is such a thing, because is God really interested in that kind of logically deductive faith? Or is he interested in something more, a personal kind of faith? To that correspondent, Lewis actually wrote this. This is actually really interesting. At the same time he was writing Silver Chair, he was corresponding at Sheldon Van Auken. So his book is Severe Mercy, is about his conversion through corresponding with C.S. Lewis and the hardships that he faced. And he had expressed, like, I want to believe, but I just can't get there. Is there any pathway for me? And then this is what Lewis says to him in this letter. He says, supposing that you did believe and you were wrong after all. He said, why then you would have paid the universe a compliment it didn't deserve. Your error would even so be more interesting and important than reality. Like your error, if you tried to believe in God and you turned out you were wrong, that's actually kind of more interesting than reality itself. And yet, how could that be? How could an idiotic universe have produced creatures whose mere dreams are so much stronger, better, subtler than itself? That's Puddleglum's argument. If we're just babies making up a game, why is our play world so much better than your real world? So this is a variation of another argument that Lewis makes regularly. It's the argument from desire. So I'll read that one to you. So this is from Mere Christianity. The Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist. That's the premise. If you have a desire, satisfaction is out there somewhere. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. There is such a thing as water. Amazing. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. So, it would be very odd if falling in love occurred in a sexless world. That would be weird. If the phenomenon that we call falling in love existed in a world without sexual complementarity and union, that would be a puzzling thing. And so Lewis is saying, the fact that we have this desire for something that we don't even know what it is, some deep, like this aching God-shaped hole, tells us something about what we were made for. Now, we may not satisfy it, but it's out there for someone. It's a funny thing if 4 childish babies can invent a better world than the real one. And that argument from desire is actually a variation of a broader argument he makes. It's like the argument from morality. You remember this one from Mere Christianity, right? Human beings make moral judgments. We just do. It's just a thing we do. We say certain things are good, certain things are evil. Certain things are right, certain things are wrong. And every time we do that, we're appealing to some objective standard that's outside of us. And so whether you're judging your neighbor or the Nazis, the very fact of your judgment, if you think something is bad, if you say that's evil, that testifies that you really do believe that there is an objective good and we're failing to meet it. That moral law is constantly pressing upon us. And that's true. He actually has this one where he has an essay called De Futilitate, on futility. And he says those moments that we feel like futility, like sickness, suffering, death, or even like you're driving and you get stuck in rush hour traffic and you're just sitting there like, what even is the point of anything? Like that time? He's like, in that moment, if you go, maybe there's no God, maybe it's all meaningless. He says, the fact that you feel futility testifies that you think the world has purpose. You think it has meaning. And because when it's not there, you feel like something's wrong. So he says, our condemnation of reality, when we say this is bad about reality, that carries with it an unconscious act of allegiance to the same reality as the source of our moral standards. Now, neither of those arguments get you all the way to Christianity. You need more, but it does get you a certain way. And his argument from reason does the same. So he has an argument where he says, he quotes this Professor Haldane a number of times, and he says this is right at the witch, who says, your reasoning processes, all of it is just matters in motion. He says, well, if my mental processes, if my thinking is determined wholly, entirely by atoms in my brain, then I have no reason to suppose that my belief is true, including the belief that there are atoms in my brain. This is what Lewis calls the self-refutation of naturalism. Naturalism, he says, refutes itself. Here it is again. If your mind is wholly dependent on your brain, the organ, and if your brain is dependent on biochemistry, and biochemistry in the long run is just the meaningless churn of atoms, then Lewis says, I don't understand why the thought of our mind should have any more significance than the sound of the wind in the trees. In other words, if naturalism is true, if the witch is right, then thoughts are just brain burps. They're fizzings of the cerebral cortex. I remember one time Doug channeled this in his debates with Christopher Hitchens. He did it this way. I remember it was a great illustration. If you have a can of Diet Coke and a can of Diet Dr. Pepper, and you shook them up, and you popped them open, and they start to just bubble over, and you slam them on a table, and you say, which one of them's winning the argument? People go, what do you mean, argument? They're just fizzing. They're just fizzing. Well, if naturalists are right, then every time you think, you're not thinking, you're just fizzing. And your thinking has no more significance than the fizzing. In other words, Lewis says, we don't need Christianity to refute naturalism. He says, it cuts its own throat. So, the common thread that runs through those arguments is that the existence of the defect, if you believe in falsehood, then you must believe in truth. If you believe in evil, you must believe in good. And if you believe in emptiness and futility, you must believe in satisfaction and fulfillment. That's one common thread. And the other one is, outside of insane asylums, belief in those things is ineradicable. You can't get rid of it. Like, no matter what philosophy you say you have, no matter what theory you may invent, you are going to keep saying that's false. And you're going to say that's evil. And you're going to say I'm pursuing satisfaction. And that cries out for an explanation. That's Puddleglum's point. Like, your explanation doesn't make sense. And then once you're out from under the incense, you realize that all of a sudden the witch's argument, right? Aslan's just a bigger and better cat, that you took the cat and you projected it out. There's actually a much better explanation. It's the one that Nate gave last night. She said that the similarity between the lamp and the sun and Aslan and the cat is because one was a copy from the other. Okay, like we project human fatherhood into the sky and we may invent God. But the reality is it works the other way. The sun is the original, the lamp is the copy. Cats are icons of Aslan, little miniature representations of the lion. And Paul tells us that fatherhood, earthly fatherhood, finds its origin in the fatherhood of God. There is projection happening, but it's God that's doing the projecting. He's saying, I'm going to communicate what I'm like through fatherhood. So there's a real similarity, but the projection runs the other way. And what this means, this is actually a fun little thing. I don't think I mentioned this last night. Silver Chair is the only Narnian chronicle in which Aslan is absent from Narnia. So he shows up in his own country in the passage that Pastor Wilson read with Jill at the stream. He's up there and he shows up at the end in his own country and then goes to visit England and scare the headmaster of Experiment House out of her mind. But he never shows up in Narnia itself. He never comes down. He's absent. Which is like the problem that we feel, like, where is God? He doesn't show himself. He doesn't show himself. But the idea here is that, like, how close is God? Well, are you thinking right now? That's how close. Do you have desire? You aching and longing for something more? God's left himself a witness. He's given you a sign that points to him. Your reasoning points to him. Your moral judgments point to him. Your desire for satisfaction, all of it is pointing to him. So yeah, he may not be manifest like he was when Jesus walked the earth, but he's here. Always, everywhere. Like you have a word, he's like, I know it. I was there before it. I'm going to come after it. He's not far from any one of us. Next thing. Puddleglum's argument cuts the throat of the witch's nothing buttery. And then in response, he asserts his allegiance to Aslan. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan. Now, Lewis distinguished in his writings between two kinds of faith. Faith A is intellectual faith, and faith B is trust or confidence, right? And we know that faith A, intellectual faith, demons have that. It doesn't save you. Demons have it, they shudder. And usually, assaults on faith B, confidence in God, have been like, does he love me? Am I a real Christian? Things like that. But in the modern world, assaults on our confidence in God have often taken the form of, he doesn't exist. Assaults on faith A. And so you get this really weird thing where you have Christians, the odd doubts of Christians, who are crying out to the God that they're not sure is there. But they're really calling on him, like, Lord, help me, but you're doubting whether he's there. And Puddleglum's saying, yeah, I'm on Aslan's side, even if my allegiance is to him, even if right now I don't have a good answer for your argument, witch. I don't think it makes sense, and I don't know how to answer all your stuff. There's one thing more. I'm on his side. His allegiance, we're in the right place. This is a fight against your moods. It's the fight of faith against your moods. And it applies to these existential doubts and every other mood you have. So Lewis said, There will come a moment when there's bad news, or a man is in trouble, or he's surrounded by other people who don't believe in Christianity, and his emotions will rise up and carry out a blitz. And he says, I'm talking about moments when a mere mood rises up against our faith, when the whole universe looks improbable, and when passion takes part in the game and starts to smother what we know to be true. He himself experienced this. He said, after he became a Christian, he had moods where he felt like maybe atheism's right after all. And he said, nobody had given me any new arguments. It's just I kind of felt funny. And he kind of would sink into it. And what he says is faith, the virtue of faith, the act of faith, he says this, it's the art of holding on to things that your reason has accepted in spite of your changing moods. It's telling your moods where they can get off. Like, moods, shut up, right? This is what the Bible does this, right? The psalmist, right? Why are you downcast, O my soul? Like, what are you doing? Stop it, okay? Lloyd Jones would say, the problem with most of us is that we spend too much time listening to ourselves instead of talking to ourselves. You listen to the mood. You let the mood hang on you. You let it ruin your day and you just sink into it. Instead of saying, mood, I need you to salute King Jesus. I'm on Aslan's side, you need to be on Aslan's side. Which is why, as Pastor Wilson said, the fundamental thing in Silver Chair is remember the signs. God has given us, we bring them before our mind. Bring the signs before your mind every day. The Word of God, the arguments from reason, whatever you need, bring it before your mind and anchor yourself so that you know where your true allegiance lies. But not only your faith, Puddleglum also mentions his obedience. I'm going to live like a Narnian, even if there's no Narnia. One of the temptations in our moments of doubt or when the mood takes hold is to push pause on obedience until we get things sorted. Well, I won't worry about holiness for now because I'm not sure if it's true. And Jesus says that's backwards. There are things that you must do in order to know whether the teaching is from God. Jesus says, if anyone's will is to do God's will, then you'll know if the teaching is from God. Obedience comes first. One of my favorite quotes from Lewis, I think I quote it on almost everything I do on Lewis, is from Screwtape. It's this one. This is Screwtape talking about the patient, and he says, the demonic cause, our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring, but still intending to do the enemy's will, looks round upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, and asks why he has been forsaken, and still obeys. So you can hear the Garden of Gethsemane lurking there, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus in the garden, sweating blood, where are you, God? That kind of thing. And Christians, we go through these moments, right? And you look around and you no longer want to do God's will. You're like, the mood is taken over and you're just sitting in the passions and there's no eager obedience. And you look around and then you obey anyway. And Screwtape says, at that point, what can the devils do to you? Like if they removed all the props from your faith and you're still like, but I'm going to still obey. I'm still going to do what God says. At that point, there's no other weapons in their arsenal. And what we discover by God's grace is that faithful obedience, even through those low times, those troughs, is frequently the pathway to renewed experience of God's presence. Right? This is Lewis's hero, George MacDonald. Obedience is the opener of eyes. God, I don't know. I can't see you. I don't know where you are. Obey. And obedience is the opener of eyes. The last two things I want to mention is that don't miss the communal aspect of Puddleglum's declaration. He says, we're leaving. We're leaving. In fact, the whole scene demonstrates that the fight of faith against the dark enchantment is a community project. Like how many times in the thing did they rouse each other's spirits by what they said? Oh, good for you, Puddleglum. Yeah, that's exactly right, Jill. Way to go, Eustace. Like they're resisting together. Our companions matter. In fact, in the Four Loves, Lewis talks about this dynamic. He says, when I'm alone among unsympathetic companions, like if I'm around people who don't believe what I believe, he says, I hold certain views and standards timidly, half ashamed to avow them, half doubting if they can be right. But you put me back among my friends, and in half an hour, in 10 minutes, those same views and standards become once more indisputable. Who your friends are matters. They reinforce your beliefs in the face of your shifting moods. They say to you when you're saying, I'm not sure about this, yes, you are. Do you really have doubts? They cut right through it and say, no, maybe I don't. You're right. That's why the book of Hebrews, right? The book of Hebrews is a book about the danger of falling away from the faith into the prevailing currents that surround us. That was the temptation for that audience. And what does that author say? Don't give up meeting together, as is the habit of some. But all the more, like meet together, right? Exhort one another every day, as long as it's called today, so that none of you are hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. The meeting together is crucial to the fight of faith. Puddleglum then says that he's going to spend his life looking for overland. Even if it's not a very long life, it's important to posture yourself right. You don't have to, if you ever have doubts, don't pretend like they're not real, but instead ask yourself, okay, given that I'm having these doubts, what should I do? How should I face them? From faith or from unbelief? Obediently or disobediently? With God's people or apart from God's people? That's the challenge. And remember that you would not be calling out to Aslan if he were not first calling out to you. It's one of the other things that Aslan tells Jill up in the country. We were calling for somebody, and Aslan says, you would not have called me if I were not first calling you. Oh, are you somebody? I am somebody, right? She didn't even know who they were calling, right? God honored it anyway. So like Puddleglum, cultivate your own desire for that far-off country. I want to close with a paragraph from The Weight of Glory. So I quoted the first part of this yesterday. It was the part where Lewis said, we have need of the strongest spell to break the evil enchantment of worldliness that's been, beaten into us by education and philosophies. Like, we need a strong spell. This is what he says right after that. He says, we don't merely want to see beauty, though. God knows even that is bounty enough. We want something else which can hardly be put into words. We want to be united with the beauty that we see, to pass into it, to receive it into ourselves, to bathe in it and become part of it. That's why we've peopled air and earth and water with gods and goddesses and nymphs and elves. Though we cannot, yet those projections can enjoy in themselves the beauty, grace, and power of which nature is the image. That's why the poets tell us such lovely falsehoods. They talk as if the west wind could really sweep into a human soul, but it can't. They tell us that beauty born of a murmuring sound will pass into a human face, but it won't. Or not yet. For if we take the imagery of Scripture seriously, if we believe that God will one day give us the morning star and cause us to put on the splendor of the sun, then we may surmise that the ancient myths in the modern poetry, which are so false as history, may be very near the truth as prophecy. At present, we are on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door. And we discern the freshness and purity of morning, but they do not make us fresh and pure. We cannot mingle with the splendors that we see. But all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in. Amen? Amen.